Hello, how are you, Kevin?
Hi, I'm doing great.
All right, we're going to try viewing this page and just see. Oh, I don't know. Well, we're trying, it looks like we're live on YouTube and hopefully we're live on Substack. And if not, I will release this on Substack separately. But thanks for joining me. I'm doing these conversations with members of the podcast collective to just chat about podcasting and see where they go. I don't know. I just think it'd be interesting to shine a light a little more on what you all do and also on our community. So before we get into anything though, Kevin, can you just complete this sentence? Tell us the reason I podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on first and foremost. The reason that I podcast is to talk to amazing creative people, especially those who don't get the spotlight, because anyone can have a podcast and interview somebody who's super famous or has a large audience or any of those sorts of things. But what I like to do is find people that I meet across the internet and see what they do creatively that is interesting. That is the origins of it. And then I have a podcast now on what authors are doing, similar in a similar vein. And then a third one, I'm sort of in and out of these, is reinventing yourself. So I'm writing a book, a memoir about reinventing myself. So I decided, why don't I talk to people who have reinvented themselves? You're part of that as well. We didn't talk about that in that series, but I think almost every creative person I know has reinvented themselves in some way, in some capacity.
Yeah. Perfect. You get to talk to people that it gives you an excuse, really, if nothing else, to have conversations with cool people. And that's one of the reasons I love podcasting as well. So it totally makes sense to me. Can you tell us? So you've mentioned reinventing yourself. Is that a podcast name?
It's called Standout Reinventions, and it's hosted through, right now it's just through Substack. It's just
Okay.
live interviews. Or if I interview somebody who is not on Substack, I can just post those, but they're all mostly hosted on Substack at this point.
Because you do Standout Creatives, which is its own podcast, and then Standout Authors, which I know you do through Substack. Does it also have a podcast feed?
It does not. So I'm putting anything through the main feed and not worrying about creating a bunch of different feeds. I don't
That
want to
makes
have to deal
sense.
with it. And I'm not posting everything to the main feed. I'm posting anybody who is not on Substack on there because otherwise there's no platform to give them. So I host the file on Spotify and then I embed that file onto Substack.
So when did you start with Standout Creatives? Because that's where it began, right? So when did you start that show?
I actually had a podcast way back in 2016 or 17, I think. And it was called Cracking Creativity. And I was talking to creative people to see what it is that makes them creative, what they've done in their creative space. And we often think of creative people as someone who's a painter, a writer, or, any of these sorts of traditionally creative fields. But what I found that anyone has the capacity to be creative. And I wanted to show people what you could do to be creative yourself, even if you don't consider yourself a creative person. And then I stopped that after close to 100 episodes, I think. I didn't quite reach it, I don't think. I was very close because I got burnt out. And in 2024, after the election in the US, my wife and I were talking about what would it be like to move somewhere, maybe if we want to. And that essentially set up this whole thing of reinvention where I moved to Costa Rica, which I've been here now for just over a year. June 1st of this year was my 1 year here. And during that same time period of thinking about moving, I decided if I want to leave my job and they do not offer me something like contract work, what can I do to make income for myself that is not attached to anything that is related to that job? And so I restarted the podcast on creativity, but this time I focused on how can I help creative business owners instead of just a general audience with their creative businesses and exploring the way that other creative people have done their business.
And then that became Standout Creatives.
Yeah, so I essentially just took over the Cracking Creativity feed. I'd repurposed it. I moved it
Rebranded.
from Libsyn, to Captivate and just
Yeah.
started publishing. I just made an announcement. I'm like, oh, I'm restarting. This is the new focus, whatever. And essentially just hijacked it.
And when did Standout Authors get added?
I believe it was the beginning of this year or the end of last year. I don't
Like the end
remember
of last
exactly when the first
Yeah.
episode aired, but relatively recently.
And why separate that out instead of it just being the same thing?
Because then I can target people more easily. So if I said creatives and I want to target authors to work with, that's the people I'm trying to help at this point in my in my stage of creative business owning. If I want to do that, I need a more specific show. So I started off wanting to work with many creative people with their marketing and stuff, but decided that was very difficult to message to people like that when you're talking about such a broad bucket. So I just chose one for authors because you don't necessarily need to have video presence or any of those sorts of things. There's Substack as a good platform based for authors, and Threads has a lot of authors. So there's a lot of different places where you can find those sorts of people. And I just made the decision. And it actually has encouraged me to write my own book and write fiction as well. So it's just been
Exciting.
this whole journey of interesting connections, and it's not
Yeah.
been a linear path at all.
So to Standout Creatives, are you still doing it or are you only doing Standout Authors now?
I am doing both. If I meet interesting people who are creatives, they're not authors, I still want to interview them and see, especially people in the bookish space who aren't necessarily authors themselves. So they could be an illustrator, they could be like a book coach, they could be any of these sorts of kind of related things, and tie them back to authorship in some capacity
Hmm.
is the ultimate goal.
And you're using Substack, and obviously we're doing this, and I checked, it is live on Substack. We're doing this on
Nice.
Substack. Yeah, I know. Yay. Hopefully that it's all good. Because, and I host a couple of newsletters there, and I have conflicted feelings about Substack. I think most people who
Yeah.
aren't pro-Nazi have some pretty conflicted feelings about Substack. And yet it is a platform unlike most of what's out there. And so I think for podcasters, though, specifically, Substack still remains kind of this, do I go there? Do I not? How do I use that with my podcast? So what has you, I know you're targeting writers and a lot of writers are on Substack. So that's part of it, I'm sure, a big part of it. But what is it about the using Substack? Because you do a lot of live recording like this. I don't. So obviously it's my first one of my first times. But what is it that appeals to you about that versus more the traditional kind of record your podcast, edit it, put it out in the podcast feed? What is it that you like about this approach you're doing now?
Yeah. So when I was originally doing that show way back in 2016, there's nothing like Substack around. So I was doing the thing where I posted to the feed. And what I found was that you don't get a lot of feedback when you do that. Like it's very difficult to get people to visit a page unless you're very good at convincing people that you can help them in a very specific way. And that's usually for like people like coaches and stuff where you're helping them with a specific task. And when you don't get a lot of feedback, it's hard to say what you're doing is making a difference. You can see download numbers, you can see where these people are, but you don't really get a sense of what do people think about this. You can add one of those things like SpeakPipe where you ask people to submit their questions.
Yeah.
But if people don't submit, then what are you supposed to do? So one of the great things about Substack is a lot of people will consume in the platform itself and they will interact. So there's a lot of interaction with people when you do lives. People will jump in and ask questions. You get feedback. People will leave comments on the post. If it's all hosted there, you can get all those sorts of things. That's one thing. The second is you get email addresses from people. And that's probably one of the most valuable things that you can get, not only as a podcaster, as business owner, but just anyone who is trying to build an audience. It's really the best way to keep in touch. Say Substack potentially goes away. You still have those email addresses. Say you want to move to a different platform. You still have those email addresses. So those are probably the two biggest reasons. And three, just the people who are on there are amazing. Like the community is being built there, aside from the Nazi stuff, obviously. But if we stopped going to the places that supported those sorts of people, there would be nowhere left to go. You can literally not go anywhere. Facebook, Instagram,
Yeah.
YouTube, all of these places, unless you're doing it all yourself on your own platform, there's no doubt that those types of people exist there. So the best thing we can do is try to make it the best place that we can together to overcome those voices.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I mean, they're everywhere. And if our country has shown nothing at this point, that's we know that. So yeah, but I always think it's important just to mention the like we acknowledge and understand there are challenges with this platform, but like you said, there are with all platforms. When you think about using Substack and the way you're using it, like I love that you mentioned email because that's one of those things when marketers, especially, and you do marketing, so this makes sense. We'll talk about podcasting. They're like, well, it's a great platform for nurturing and things like that. But it's not necessarily your best top of funnel marketing technique because you're not capturing emails. Like there's no way to know who you're speaking to or how to engage with them specifically. You want to get people get their email so that you can actually speak directly with people. And then you can use the podcast, sort of that next level down, to point them to a place where they get to know you more, have that longer term relationship with you. But Substack does offer that unique way of sort of making that top of funnel where it's got the discoverability and you're able to capture those leads onto your email list and then also nurture. So it's kind of handling all of that, which is really exciting. But are there things about it that maybe, because I know they're still working on the podcast part of what they do. It's not their primary function. I don't think they would say. I think it's, first and foremost for writers doing writing, but they are working on trying to really make podcasting a bigger piece of what they do. Are there things that you still wish that it could do, or things that you're like, I do think when I think about the way I used to podcast, maybe this part was a little better, or anything like that? Like, is it leave anything that's not quite good enough yet?
Yeah, since I'm not actually hosting the podcast, I'm really just embedding and or
Mm.
hosting the live videos. There's not a whole lot on the podcast side of Substack, like the subscription fee and all that, the RSS, where you upload your RSS link into it and it automatically pulls. Since I'm not doing that, there's not a whole lot. I can kind of tailor the recording or whatever it is that I'm doing to fit the needs of whatever the post is. And the way that I'm doing it right now is I'm just I'm pulling the transcript and like some notes and having Claude help me decide what the main talking points are, because I don't want to have to either re-listen to the thing or read the whole transcript and figure out what to say. So it really just helps streamline that. And that was one of the biggest issues when I had my first podcast. I was manually editing from scratch. So I was listening to the whole thing. I was manually writing down transcript quotes to put into my show notes, and I was writing notes as I did it. So it was just like such a long process that didn't seem to provide the results that you would expect for that much work. So having something help you with those sorts of things is definitely something I advocate for, especially if you do some tailoring and have it match your voice. You can do as much or as little as you want to help you do that. So it's up to each podcaster, I guess, to decide whether or not it makes sense.
I mean, I started podcasting around the same time as you, 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. And, recording on Zoom, then taking it into, instead of GarageBand, I use iMovie, but either way, taking into a platform there where you then had to go through this really arduous editing process and then pay some service like rev.com or something for transcripts, and then having to go through all of that, pulling out the quotes, writing the show notes. Like, it was a really long process pre-AI tools that are now integrated into things like we're using Riverside to record this, and then also can easily push it out live in a couple of places. It's going to generate a transcript for me. It creates some clips I can use. Like, so much of that is reduced now, whether you're doing it through Substack or somewhere else. That friction point is gone. And I'm bringing all that, like reiterating what you're saying, because one of the things you said early on that I wanted to talk about was burnout. That the reason you sort of that first iteration of your podcast, you were like, I got to push the brakes here, was burnout. Was it because of all of that stuff? Or is there something else that has made it easier for you as you've been going on and doing podcasting long?
Yeah, all of that was definitely, I was like doing all of that and I wasn't. I was actually at that point in time trying to help artists with their marketing. And what I found in that journey, that was kind of why I started the podcast, to help those people discover what you can learn from other creatives. And this is something I've talked about before, but I tried to launch a course because everyone did in those days. And it did not work at all. I got like crickets. And like I did all of this like just to set up this way that I can help people, and I got nothing. I'm gonna stop and see if I want to come back at any point, right? And it was only I think I stopped in 2019, so it took until 2024 to really decide. Oh yeah, this is something I want to attempt to do again. So there's so much work that goes into podcasting back then, and now that Riverside is here and some of these other things that you can use, it makes it like infinitely easier to release a podcast. And I think we can overlook the fact that AI is like this evil thing that is used to steal. And it can be, right? Obviously, it can be. And there are some environmental concerns, but is it always on the consumer to decide we have to stop this ourselves? Is there not a way for us as a society to make the people who are in charge of helping society run better get those people to make the changes that we want versus on every single individual deciding collectively, because it's very hard to get a bunch of people to agree on anything,
Right.
especially on something like this where some people use it, some people don't use it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it good for environment? Is it destroying us? Is there a way to mitigate all that? So there's like so much that goes into all these things, but you have the decision to make on whether or not you want to use the tools that are available to you. And at this point, I think by default, almost everything is using AI in some capacity. So there's no way around it. It's just how much do you want to take on in addition to what
Yeah.
companies are essentially forcing you to do.
Well, we can't even as humans all agree that the earth is in fact round. So like there's no way we're going to agree on all of this. And we don't need to go too far down this rabbit hole either, in the same way that, there are many people for whom Substack is a no-go because of the platforming of Nazis, and I also 100% agree and understand. And with you, and the same thing with AI, many people who are saying I'm completely abstaining for all of the reasons that it's bad, and I also completely understand that. But I'm like you, where it's sort of this middle ground of how do we each individually come up with our own ethical codes around those things, finding ways to operate within systems that are broken, knowing that when the systems are broken, it's not up to individuals, or that not even not up to, but individuals can't change or fix the systems. It's about collective action, and that's more about who we are voting into power and all of those sorts of things. But this is and I love that we're
Whole different
yeah,
giant discussion
it is
around
probably, and
all
it's
of
probably for
that.
some of my other podcasts where we love to have those conversations. But I do think it's great that you're mentioning it, because one thing it does sort of come to is the podcast collective. So Feminist Podcast Collective, which you're a member of, and you're one of the only men, and I love the fact that you're like, yeah, I sign me up for something that's called feminist because men should be feminists. And so we could talk about that if you want, but it's more about the fact that we are all folks who are navigating these conversations in the podcasting space, whether it's about Substack and those ethics, AI and those ethics, and other things, knowing that we all have a shared value set around humanity, humans, the planet, all of that, and also knowing that we're operating inside of broken systems, and what do we do with that information. So for people who are also, wrestling with those things, what has being part of a community that shares that value set? Like, what does that do for you personally, and then just in your podcasting journey?
Yeah. I mean, the community has been incredible. I think there's so many communities that you can join and you can just be like a person in a giant group. We're both part of one of those where it's like very hard to build like actual community. It feels like when you're in bigger communities, everyone has less of a voice. And it's very hard to really build those sorts of relationships unless you make the active choice to do that. But I love the way that you've built this community in order for everyone to get to know each other. We actually know, for the most part, most of the people who come in, we've usually talked to each other outside of the collective as well. And there's so many things built to help people overcome something that is and can be a very individual endeavor. Even though you have hosts, you can have a co-host or you can have guests. It's still, if you're the person that's in charge of upkeeping the thing, there's so much that goes into it. And there's so much that we can learn from everybody. Whether you've been doing it for like 15, 20 years since the beginning, or if you just started and you're trying to learn it from scratch. I think everybody can learn something from everyone. And I think the types of people that you encourage to join are amazing because of the shared values and all the things that have been set in place, which is one of those great things that when you say things up front, you detract the people who shouldn't belong there anyways, because they're not going to like it. You're not going to like it. It's hard to manage all of this stuff. So I think you've built a beautiful space for people to really learn and grow together as podcasters.
Well, thanks. Okay. So, well, thank you. And I wanted to share about the community, because part of this conversation is to make sure people know about the amazing kinds of folks that are inside the podcast collective. So if you're a podcaster and looking for a community space, but a space with a shared value set around, trying to create a more equitable, just world, then check out Feminist Podcast Collective. Now I want to go back. I just put that in there because I felt like it was the right time to talk about it. But something else that I
Perfect.
wanted to explore quickly with you too is around perfectionism, because you are doing almost all of your podcast recording at this point. Almost all of them are done live. Like, you're doing Substack lives for probably, I would guess, like 90% or more of your podcast interviews at this point. Am I right?
It's probably like 75%
Yeah.
of my podcasts are being done live.
Yeah. And then, so
I
that for at least those who show up live to the recordings. I'm assuming if you wanted to, maybe you could then edit after, but it's raw, it's real. This is what it looks like, right? Because you're showing up just saying, come watch me record. And if I want to clean it up later, I can. Maybe you do, or maybe you don't. But for some people, that can be scary, because I think one of the things that sometimes keeps people from podcasting, or that leads to some of the burnout, is that need for the podcast to seem so perfect, because they're watching the many other celebrity podcasts that have the fancy studios and the lights and the producers and the, amazing mics and sound quality and everything. And they're comparing themselves against that. And I think that's holding a lot of people back. And so just talk to me a little bit about like the experience of going live and how you've been adjusting to that, like having to just sort of let it be what it is.
Yeah. It's so funny because I think the first live that I did was with one of the other members, Heather Vickery. And then my second one was with Nicole Havelka. And that was like right before I moved, which was around somewhere between April and June of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no plans to go live or do anything live at that point in time. It was just like, okay, this was kind of fun. There was people that may or may not have joined, but it was, I think, towards the end of last year or the beginning of this year, I decided there's so many cool people. They have audiences here that are built in. They can bring in my audience. There's a lot of people in my audience that show up consistently. And it's not a lot of people, but I see the same handful of 4 or 5 people that show up, or some of them, or if they don't show up live, they will comment on the recording. So I think lives are a great way to be connected with people, especially if your person has an audience that wants to know more from them, but they don't want to necessarily do something like a Q&A, because it's very weird, I've found, to do live Q&As where you're just talking into the thing, like the camera. I've tried to do like solo episodes and they're just like too weird for me. I need somebody to look at and talk to. So I think having people there is to encourage you, and then you see the little hearts pop up, and you don't ever expect it, because why would anybody be watching me at like 12 o'clock on a Monday talk about this? So I think lives are a great raw format. And for the most part, I don't do anything with the live as far as editing goes. I've let the live speak for itself and just allow people to see it as it happened.
I think I honestly think it's such a wonderful challenge and a great idea for particularly new people to podcasting who are like, I don't know if I want to do podcasting yet. I don't know if I want to take on the work. I don't, whatever, like just to try setting up a Substack and doing some lives and just see how you even feel. Like do a live interview and see, do I like this? Because if it feels like a really low stakes way to try out podcasting without having to go through all the other pieces of, getting your podcast set up, somebody with a host, and getting it all set to go distribute to all the places. So I love that you're just like, yeah, let's just have a real conversation and let that be good enough. Because I just think we love so many of the celebrity podcasts, and I think that the polish and stuff that they're bringing can be harmful, or can really hold back some marginalized voices that are comparing themselves and their resourcing. And we need those voices. And I know you know that, because your Standout Authors is really focused on highlighting the voices that are under-recognized, that aren't getting heard. So I just want to, before I go into the last like 2 short things, what's important to you about highlighting those voices instead of using your platform, like you said, to be able to speak to big giant authors, I don't even know any big giant authors, John Grisham, whatever. For you to say, no, I want to highlight these voices of people whose books don't get the attention that they should. What's so important about that to you?
I think it stems from myself. Like, no one has ever given me a platform or said, here, come talk about your thing here. So I decided, first, I'm going to create it for myself, just to give myself a platform to talk to people. And second, to give those who also don't get a chance to do it that often a chance, because I think we can take the resources for granted. So some people have access to things that other people don't. And that's not because they're better people or whatever. It's probably because they're luckier, or it's usually luck. I think almost everything
Luck and
successful.
privilege.
Yeah. Like, I think those are tied together, luck and privilege, because you're lucky to have privilege. So I think
There you
that's
go.
like kind of the deal there. your luck was built on the fact that you had resources or the access to these people, or that you're not discriminated against. So I think everyone should be given some sort of platform to really talk about the work that they're doing, because no one's work is inherently better or worse than anybody else's. Obviously, some can have bigger audiences, some can be more polished, some can, gain traction because of certain factors. But I think anyone who's trying to do creative work knows that it's very difficult, not only to do the work, but to get seen doing the work. So I wanted to give authors that platform to be able to do that. And if I'm like their first interview to practice on their way to success, that would be a great honor.
I love that. And just quickly, I know we have a couple people watching live, and anyone who catches this before Wednesday. So today's Monday, the 15th, if you're watching this of June. If you host a podcast, you do not have to be a member of the Feminist Podcasters Collective to come to our pitch event on Wednesday. It's our Juneteenth annual pitch fest where we just feature Black women. So we invite only Black women to come in and to pitch themselves, to host podcasts, to say, I would love to be a guest on your show, because these are the folks whose voices are the least likely to be allowed onto shows, invited onto shows, welcomed onto shows. And we want to have them have more voices hearing. And because of that, to really honor saying we want to amplify these voices, it's the one time a year Feminist Podcasters Collective invites non-members to participate in an event. So if you host a podcast and you notice that your lineup doesn't look too diverse, please let us know, because we'd love to have you come. You can just send me your email. You can reach out to me on Substack and I will send you the invite and you can come. It's free. You can come and just sit quietly. You don't have to be on camera or anything. You just get to be a fly on the wall, listen to these 20 plus incredible Black women pitch, and hopefully have them on your shows. So definitely let me know if that's something that's of interest. Okay, Kevin, to finish up, and our bestie Stephanie just logged in. So hi, Steph.
Hi, Steph.
To finish up, I want to get the best and worst podcast advice you've ever gotten. So let's start with the worst. What's the worst podcast advice somebody's either given you or that you've just heard out there that you think that's not great advice?
Jeez, there's so much,
I know.
much bad
It's
advice
a lot harder to
out
come
there.
up with a good advice, I think. But go ahead, let's start with bad. There's so much.
The worst podcast advice is that you probably need to share all of it on social media everywhere and to do all the things in order to get it seen and heard and around. Obviously, you can do that, but a lot of that has to do with your capacity, your willingness, your ability to do that. And most people don't. And I don't know that it has as big of an impact as people would guess. It is definitely a good way if you're comfortable doing that and you have enough people in your audience to benefit from it. But if you think releasing something on social media is going to build your audience for you, I don't think you know how audience building works. So that would probably be one of the biggest things, is that you need to share everywhere, anywhere, as much as you can. Obviously, the more that you do it, the better your odds of getting found are, but it's not necessarily going to grow your audience or your business or anything like that inherent.
Yeah. Definitely no guarantees and a potential recipe for burnout. So good one.
Exactly.
And then what is the best podcast advice, either that you've heard or that you would want to share just based on your own experience?
The best advice I would give is to do what you're comfortable with. What I was doing before in 2016, 17 was so much, and there's a reason I stopped. So I actually now just do a standard intro outro. I used to do like customized intros and outros, and I didn't notice that it made any sort of difference at all. I don't think people care. They're just going to jump to the conversation and see what happens. Unless you're like a big celebrity that has something interesting to say, or you do something like topics outside of the actual interview itself. So you can set up the podcast anywhere you want. That's another thing. Just do what you want. You're not bound by any rules. You don't have to interview people. You don't have to do solo episodes. You can experiment. You can do whatever you want. It's your decision to decide what your podcast is, what it should be. And you can change your formats. You can do all sorts of things with your podcast, which is one of the beautiful things about it, is just to use it as a way to experiment, to have fun. Obviously, if you're not having any fun, you're also going to resent it. So do it how you want, have fun with it, and don't let people dictate what you do, because you're the only one that's going to decide whether or not it continues.
I love that. And Kevin, obviously, Substack's probably one of the best places to find you, but tell people where they can learn about you and your shows.
Yeah, you can go to standoutcreativebusiness.substack.com. You can search for Standout Creatives on any of the podcast platforms, minus YouTube, I think. Standout Authors is mostly hosted on Substack, and Standout Reinventions is also currently on Substack. That doesn't mean I can't spin them off at any point, but currently that's where everything is. So if you are looking for anything that I'm doing, it's going to be found
I love that. I think it makes sense just keeping it in one feed instead of, I think I sometimes tend to water things down by starting new feeds, and every once in a while I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. So I think keep it there. It's great. And thank you for your time today. And if you're interested in Feminist Podcasters Collective, you can go to feministpodcasterscollective.com or feministpods.com. You can find our newsletter here, Amplify on Substack. And thank you so much for doing this, Kevin. Thanks for being part of the community and for having the conversation with me.
Yeah, thanks for everything that you do. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll grow the membership some more through these sorts of conversations because I love them.
I hope so. I hope people who are looking for a community, we don't bite. We're really nice people. We have great members. We've gotten a couple new members in the last like week. So very excited about that. All right. Thanks, Kevin.